Hey everybody, this is ElectroLlama. I'm here with a new campaigns video. This one is called Probes. Now the Kerbeit Union gets the ball rolling by making the Muna 9. It's basically a soft lander destined for Moon, and it has a module on top that separates and then rotates to take panoramic images. Now they put this probe on top of the old Cosgod 2B that you've seen in the previous episode. And so the Kerbeit style is to have a bunch of rockets on the bottom. I heard in a documentary the reason why the Soviet Union had so many rockets on the bottom was so that if one failed, then the other ones could take their place. And unlike the Americans, their engineering was based on trial and error. And now adjusting the maneuver node, you basically want to position the maneuver node so that the closest approach is as small as possible, using as little fuel as possible. So basically you determine where you want to launch from, and I actually don't even keep the maneuver node. I delete it and then trust that launching from there will give a good close approach. Here you can see the approach. You see that it's nice and close to the surface. And because of the Oberth effect, this will reduce the amount of delta V needed to circularize and maintain orbit around Moon. You see me burning retrograde to bring down the apoapsis, get in a nice circular orbit. And in the circular orbit, I will align the trajectory so that I can plan where I want to land the probe. Here's a view of the surface from the actual imaging camera. One trick that I use while landing is once I have a suborbital trajectory showing that I'll crash into the surface, I take a maneuver node and put it right at that point, and then I drag the retrograde button backwards, which will basically tell me how long it'll take to completely cancel out my velocity. And so I look at that time window and determine when I should fire up my rockets at full power. It's usually good not to point your rocket towards the retrograde marker, but to point on the horizon. This will basically cancel your horizontal velocity so that instead of traveling sideways, you travel downwards, which is much easier for landing, especially for choosing a place to actually land. Here you see that my velocity is too high. I'm coming down too quickly, so I quickly try to cancel my velocity, and I'm not successful, and I end up crashing. So then the Kerbeites send up the Muna 2B, basically repeat the mission, and hopefully this time have a more successful landing. Something that's interesting to notice is once it maintains a circular orbit, it's actually positioned on the dark side of Moon where there aren't any communications. And so this is basically preventing any landings on the far side of Moon. Here you see me get in a suborbital trajectory again. This time I have enough time to cancel my horizontal velocity. Once I reach a nice curved trajectory, I start pointing retrograde and basically try to get my retrograde marker to reach the top of the navigation ball. Here you see my landing. Start tipping over, and I press the button to eject the image ball. Basically, I fly off, start rolling, and then use SAS to cancel my roll. Then I can basically rotate and take video of the landscape. And then using software, I stitch these photos together into a panoramic photo. The Kerbeites also send up the Muna 10, which is an orbiter. This is basically for communications and to take images of Muna around orbit. Its design is actually very similar to the Muna 9, but without the extra landing modules. There's not too much to comment for this mission. It's just a standard launch up to Moon and get into a circular orbit. Next, the Kerbeites want to do the same thing, but for Minmus. So they actually take the same exact spacecraft and launch it into space. and try to get a close approach with Minmus. Now they don't have to worry too much about saving delta V because the gravity of Minmus is a lot lighter, so they actually end up with a lot of extra rocket fuel. Minma 9 turns toward Minmus for an image, then towards the sun to charge its solar panels. However, the Kerbiots forgot to extend the communication antenna, so when the Minima 9 was ready to establish an orbit, it wasn't able to fire its rockets. So as a final effort, they decided to launch a communication satellite close to Moon's orbit, and this is just enough to establish a link. Minma spacecraft takes an last image before landing, emerges from the dark side of Minmus, and then plans its descent. From the imaging cam, they can see that the landscape of Minmus is a lot different from Moon. And also the descent is a lot slower and easier to control. It does the same thing, it ejects and rolls on the surface. However, unlike last time, there wasn't enough communication to correct the roll, and it wasn't able to take a panorama. But even with the random rolling, it was still able to take the images and splice them together to make a larger image of the surface of Minmus. And now the Lunar Comsat starts orbiting Moon, and so it's able to have better communication with Moon landings. The Kerbicans also perform a similar launch, where they make a probe to land on Moon's surface. The Kerbicans reuse their Kerbina launch vehicle. This time, instead of circularizing and then rendezvousing, they time their launch so that they can go right into a trajectory with Moon. Again, they have a similar communication issue, but with the orbit satellite, they're able to correct this fairly easily. And they make sure they extend their communication antennas before landing. Right, so they actually burn down to go from an elliptical orbit into a nice circular orbit. They start their burning retrograde. They have to make sure that they don't come in too shallow. So using the same trick with the maneuver node, they figure out how long it'll take to cancel its velocity. Make sure they come at a nice steep angle. But they still fire their rockets too late, and they're coming in too fast, and they end up crashing the Kerveyor one. So the Kerbicans send another Kerveyor, do the same mission, hopefully get a better landing. Rendezvous with Moon, take a last image before landing. You can actually see the crater coming up along the horizon. And a similar thing happens, and they're not able to slow down enough to avoid impact. And the main issue this time is actually that they run out of fuel right before reaching the ground. So they end up crashing again. You can see the fuel depleting. So they try it a third time. The same issue happens. They run out of fuel before landing. And then on the fourth time, they're able to plan their landing better so that they end up with more fuel. And they land just in time right before they run out of fuel. Here you can see it carefully descending on the surface. It has to be careful because it's landing on a slight incline. Then they turn off their stabilization and make contact with the surface. Next time, the Kerbicans will finally start preparing for a manned mission to Moon. And so the next episode will go into the development of the Kerbalo space program. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.